Hi, my name is Sarah Stern. I'm the founder and president of the Endowment for Middle East Truth, EMET, and we'd like to welcome all of you here today in our listening audience to one of EMET's monthly telephone seminars. One of the most wonderful things about being able to do this work is that you get to know all sorts of wonderful people. And one of my more recent acquaintances is Fred Fleitz. Now, Fred works as a senior vice president for policy and programs with the Center for Security Policy, a Washington, D.C. national security think tank. As most of you know, we are very, very closely affiliated with Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy and have been working very closely with him for many, many years. Fred served in United States national security positions for over 25 years at the CIA, DIA, the Department of State, and the House Intelligence Committee staff. During the administration of President George W. Bush, Fred was Chief of Staff to John Bolton, then Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. Many of you have attended some of our conferences where Ambassador John Bolton was the keynote speaker. During Fred's tenure with the House Intelligence Committee, he was the staff expert on the Iranian and North Korean nuclear programs and briefed key national intelligence estimates on these issues to important committee members. After he left government in 2011, he founded and served as director of the Langley Intelligence Group Network and Newsmax Media's Global Intelligence and Forecasting Service. Fred is a regular commentator on Secure Freedom Radio and has appeared on the Fox News channel. Fred is the author of Peacekeeping Fiascos of the 1990s and is working on books on intelligence reform and the Iranian nuclear project. Fred holds an MA in political economy from Fordham University and a BA in politics from St. Joseph's University. Now that we have all reached, unfortunately, implementation day on January 16th, we are waiting to see how this Iranian nuclear deal is going to affect many things, including Iran's quest for global hegemony and all of its nefarious activities in terms of support for terrorism to Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis in Yemen. And one of the things I'm most concerned about is that now Iran has been again given access to the SWIFT banking system, which means that Iran will have access to 10,800 various financial institutions throughout the world, so it can move money around very quickly and undetected to all of its terrorist proxies around the globe. So we could not have a better speaker to come address us today than Fred Fleitz. Okay, Fred, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, for that very kind introduction. It's an honor to speak to EMET, which has been a powerful and influential voice in Washington on U.S.-Israel relations, and also has been very influential in raising public awareness to national security threats and threats to Israel. And Sarah, I really have enjoyed working with you, and I view you as an important resource and ally in fighting against this terrible nuclear deal with Iran. On January 16th, the International Atomic Energy Agency declared that Iran had met implementation day under the nuclear deal, which is known as the Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. What this meant is that Iran achieved certain requirements to roll back the nuclear program, and in exchange, it was awarded about $150 billion in sanctions relief. The United States also returned $400 million it had seized around 1979 after the Iranian Revolution, and $1.3 billion in interest on that $400 million. On the same day, 5 Americans were exchanged for 7 Iranians, and 14 Iranians were removed from the Interpol wanted list. The United States agreed to stop seeking their arrest. All these Iranians were accused or convicted of violating U.S. laws on proliferation, mostly concerning ballistic missile technology. The President and Secretary Kerry portrayed this as evidence that diplomacy works and as major victories for U.S. foreign policy. And you've probably seen Iranian President Rouhani racing around Europe this week, cashing in on this new agreement, and Sarah talked about some other aspects of it. I want to talk about how we got to this agreement and where we are going, and what is it exactly that Iran agreed to. Well, the specific things Iran agreed to was that it agreed to put most of its operational centrifuges into storage. These are machines that it's using to make nuclear fuel, reportedly for reactors. It agreed to send most of its enriched uranium out of the country. It agreed to remove the core of a heavy water reactor near the town of Arak, which is spelled A-R-A-K. And these were portrayed as significant achievements that will keep Iran a year away from a nuclear bomb and significantly improve U.S. national security. So is this true? Well, my assessment is that this agreement was written in such a way so Iran would be able to reach these achievements. We basically lowered the bar by dropping certain long-standing requirements to lower the threat from the Iranian nuclear program and proposing things that Iran could meet, even though it's not going to significantly reduce the threat from the Iranian nuclear program. And in fact, the threat from this program will actually increase every year the nuclear deal is in effect. For example, Iran had about 9,000 operational centrifuges before implementation day. It will be allowed to continue to enrich uranium with 5,000. It will be allowed to keep 6,000 operational. Now, Iran did have 19,000 centrifuges, and the ones that are not being kept operational will be put into storage. Nothing's being destroyed. None of the centrifuges are being destroyed. But Iran will continue to enrich during the deal. In addition, Iran will be permitted to test advanced centrifuges during the deal and will be permitted to test them with enriched uranium, which Iran was not allowed to do while the negotiations were in effect. So this is going to actually decrease the amount of time necessary for Iran to make enriched uranium for nuclear weapons while the agreement is in effect, if it chooses to do this. But its expertise in enriching will continue to increase while the deal is in effect. Iran is supposed to have no more than 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium, reactor-grade uranium, and sent the rest of its uranium out of the country. However, it was allowed to keep a certain amount of enriched uranium to make into fuel plates for a research reactor in Tehran. It also was allowed to convert some of its enriched uranium stockpile into uranium oxide, a process that can be reversed in about 2 weeks. When the IAEA declared that Iran had met the requirement to send its enriched uranium out of the country, it didn't give specifics on exactly what was sent out. We know Iran declared it had sent this material out. And how the IAEA verified this, I don't know. And there was no statement on how much of this enriched uranium stockpile was converted into uranium oxide. There's various estimates of how many nuclear weapons Iran could make out of its low enriched uranium stockpile. I think the president has said about 10, which is about how many the Center for Security Policy is estimating Iran could make out of this uranium. Iran was not just giving up this uranium. It was a swap. In exchange for sending its enriched uranium stockpile to Russia, Iran received an equivalent amount in uranium ore from Kazakhstan that can be converted back into enriched uranium in a few months. And finally, there's the issue of removing the core of the Arak heavy water reactor. Iran reportedly did this according to the IAEA and filled parts of the reactor with cement. However, China is going to rebuild the reactor with a new core so the reactor will produce less weapons-grade plutonium. Now, you may have heard some U.S. officials say that when this reactor is redesigned, it will not produce plutonium or weapons-grade plutonium. It's impossible to operate a heavy water reactor without producing plutonium as a byproduct in spent uranium. Now, whether it will not be able to produce enough plutonium for a weapon is sort of immaterial, because operating this reactor and constructing it will give Iran essential expertise in this technology. Plutonium is a very valuable fuel for making a nuclear bomb. The reason is it has a critical mass in a nuclear explosion, 1/5 that of enriched uranium. And this is important because when making a missile warhead or a warhead for a cruise missile, weight is an important consideration. And if you're going to make these weapons, it's better to make them with plutonium rather than enriched uranium fuel for that reason. So, I mean, my view is that the bar was lowered on these requirements because Iran refused to give up its reactor. It refused to stop enriching uranium. So the Obama administration found a way to get an agreement that allowed Iran to continue to enrich and to continue to have a heavy water reactor. This goes against the fact that when the administration came in 2009, it supported the Bush administration's position to discourage the spread of uranium enrichment worldwide because this technology is so easy to use to make weapons. The Bush administration, at the very end, I think in January 2009, signed an agreement with the United Arab Emirates that shared peaceful nuclear technology with that country, but it had to forego the pursuit of uranium enrichment. The Obama administration didn't just support that agreement, it strengthened it. But by 2011, the Obama administration backed away from the position that it would discourage the spread of enriched uranium worldwide, not just with Iran, but with a number of countries. And I think this has really put us down in dangerous, because not only are we hearing news right now that other nations in the Middle East may try to acquire nuclear weapons because they're worried about Iran, there's also reports that there are many nations around the world who believe they should be allowed to enrich because Iran will be allowed to enrich. And I think that's a dangerous situation. Concerning lowering the bar, and that is the requirements that would be needed for sanctions to be lifted against, there are some other issues. Ballistic missiles. The president said when the nuclear agreement was announced last July that Iran would abide by UN Security Council resolutions barring the testing of ballistic missiles for 8 years. Well, it turns out that that commitment was not actually in the agreement. It was buried in an annex to a Security Council resolution which approved the agreement. Now, I know that sounds confusing, but that was a way to get this agreement despite the fact that Iran would not agree to that requirement. So we could claim Iran agreed to do something, but since it's not actually in the deal, we can lift sanctions even though Iran broke that agreement by testing ballistic missiles this past fall. Then there's the issue of Iran's past nuclear weapons-related work, which in lingo is known as possible military dimensions, the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program. The president said in July this would be resolved as part of the nuclear agreement. We found out a few weeks after he said that isn't true. This issue actually was the subject of a secret side deal between the IAEA and Iran. And under this deal, Iranians actually were used to inspect Iranian facilities for evidence of past nuclear weapons-related work. The IAEA did a report on this investigation that it issued in early December. The report was astonishing. First of all, Iran didn't cooperate with the investigation. Surprise, surprise. It lied on several elements of what the IAEA had asked about. But what I found most astonishing as a former intelligence officer, the report found that Iran continued nuclear weapons-related work at least until 2009. The IAEA said it did not have confirmed information that this activity continued after 2009. And I've spoken to a member of Congress who said that's not good enough for him. He wants to know, does the IAEA have any unconfirmed information suggesting that Iran may be continuing their weapons work today? And I'm concerned, and I've written about this, that the IAEA may not have had confirmed information of nuclear weapons activity continuing because the Obama administration stopped sharing that information when Mr. Obama entered the office of the president in 2009. So this is something that has to be investigated. I think it's a big deal. Then there's the issue of the Iranian parliament. In October, the Iranian parliament passed a different version of the agreement, which bars the inspections of military facilities interviews with military officers and scientists, and there's some other requirements. So the deal actually is different in the Iranian mind than it is than the one that the rest of the world is aware of. But nevertheless, sanctions still were lifted because Iran was declared to be in compliance. And then there's the issue of Iranian behavior. Iran's going to get this enormous windfall, $150 billion, $400 million from the United States plus $1.3 billion in interest on that $400 million. And Iran's behavior has actually gotten significantly worse over the last few months. This includes an increased role in Syria, firing rockets near a U.S. aircraft carrier, stepping up its support to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And what's going to happen when, now that sanctions have been lifted, Iran is no longer worried about consequences for its action. I'm not sure it was ever worried about it. I'm concerned that it will become emboldened to behave in a more even more belligerent manner now that sanctions have been lifted under implementation day. I want to talk briefly about the prisoner exchange. 5 innocent Americans who were not prisoners, they were hostages, were exchanged for 7 Iranians. Some of these Americans, as you know, were treated brutally in Iranian prisons. Robert Levinson, a former CIA and FBI officer, was not released. We don't know that he's alive. I'm sure the Iranians know where he is, but they were claiming they didn't know where he was. Now, there's major concern on Capitol Hill that this amounted to the United States paying ransom to Iran for the release of American hostages who were being held by Iran to influence America's policy towards Iran. And that's specifically true concerning this mysterious $1.3 billion in interest paid on the $400 million that the United States seized in 1979. An Iranian official has said that was ransom. Congress believes it was ransom. Now, the United States paid bail for the release of 3 American hostages. Well, I should say the government of Oman paid on our behalf a few years ago to get these American hostages released. They were hikers who wandered into Iranian territory. I have a feeling that ransom was also paid in this instance, and this is something that we have to look into. There's a dangerous precedent set with this going on. And I guess really what I was most concerned about was the lack of moral outrage by the administration when it announced the hostage or prisoner exchange. I mean, of course we're happy these Americans were released, but I didn't hear Secretary of Carrier, President Obama, saying very clearly that the taking of innocent Americans as prisoner by Iran is unacceptable and has to stop. This was taking hostages an act of terror. And I didn't see any more outrage. We seem to be celebrating Iran's actions when Iran was solving a problem it caused and is still committing an act of terror because it's probably holding Levinson. There's another American who was arrested in November. There's also an American green card holder who is being held prisoner in Iran. And of these 5 Americans that were released on the 16th, the fact one of them having been taken prisoner was not publicly known. So there could be other Americans being held in Iran, and the American people have not been told about this. So I think the outstanding question here is, this is such a terrible deal. What's the objective of this deal? How can the administration say that this is a success? What is President Obama up to here? And I don't say this in a flippant manner. I'm just thinking out loud, and I put this to a number of experts because this simply doesn't add up. How can we have an agreement to stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons that allows it to continue to enrich uranium? Well, Frank Gaffney asked this of Richard Pearl, a legendary national security expert who was known as the Prince of Darkness during the Reagan administration because of his determined efforts to bring down the Soviet Union. I want to read you what Pearl said because I think he got this right. I've never seen an approach to an international agreement like this, and when the view is expressed by administration officials and administration supporters that this is a political deal, I'm afraid that is their concept. Their concept is that the terms of the agreement and the likely consequences, if the Iranians choose to do what they're able to do under the agreement, don't matter, because this agreement somehow is going to magically transform an Iranian regime that regards the United States as a great Satan and engages us through the subvention of terrorism in many places in the world, this regime will somehow alter its character. And so for people who hold that view, and I believe the President is among them, the details of the agreement and the consequences of the agreement are of no significance. They are making an enormous, and I think an improvident bet. Their bet is that this agreement, which satisfies all what the Iranians are looking for, will somehow lead the Iranians to become our friends. In this, they are certainly mistaken. I think Pearl really hit the nail on the head. This is not about stopping Iran's nuclear program. This is about transforming Iran. I think that really is the President's objective. And as we look forward, I think we can see that that's not going to happen. Iran's behavior is getting worse. I think Iran is pocketing this bet. It's going to invest the gains that it got, the financial windfall from the lifting of sanctions, to sponsor terrorism, destabilize the Middle East, and invest in its missile and nuclear program. I'm very concerned that there is an agreement between Iran and North Korea to cooperate in nuclear weapons technology and testing. There have been several reports of Iranian scientists witnessing North Korean missile and nuclear tests. I don't know that there were Iranians at the last North Korean nuclear test, but I'm certain that there were. It makes sense. And if Iran is able to shield certain areas from IAEA inspectors, and if it is able to conduct certain nuclear activities in North Korea, this program could advance rapidly despite this agreement. Keep in mind that Secretary Kerry says that this agreement has the most invasive inspection regime in history. But if you look at it, the agreement calls for the inspection of the nuclear supply chain and declared nuclear facilities. There is an appeal process to get access to undeclared facilities. But if it's true that the Iranian parliament has put military sites off limits, that's not going to apply. And, I mean, let's face it, if there's covert nuclear activities going on in Iran, it's being done at military facilities. There's also a question that, assuming that the IAEA even gets Iran's agreement to go into these facilities, they may be investigated by Iranians. This is what happened at the Parchin military facility when Iranians were used to collect samples at this facility on past Iranian nuclear weapons work. And ironically, even though Iran collected these samples, the IAEA detected that the samples were fraudulent and Iran was trying to deceive it on what really happened at this facility. So I think we're looking at a deal that has hurt our security, has hurt regional security. I think Iranian behavior will get worse throughout this year. And the next president is going to have quite a challenge to repair. I believe it can be fixed by a future president with leadership. This president is going to have to put together a new alliance with our European allies, reject this deal at the very beginning, and come to the Iranians to say, well, you know, there's a new sheriff in town. We're now pursuing an agreement to actually stop you from pursuing nuclear weapons. You have to answer all questions about past nuclear weapons-related work. You have to stop enrichment, and you have to stop sponsorship of terror. And I think that this is going to be really a sign of leadership for whoever is in the White House next October. So, Sarah, with that, I think I'm going to stop. And I also would love to hear your take on this because I learn a lot from you whenever we have these discussions, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, I would just, first of all, like to thank Fred for his brilliant analysis of what's going on, and he has just been pivotal in the very, very important fight that those of us who were against this agreement, Fred has just been really providing all of us with excellent, excellent information that we've all used on Capitol Hill in our attempts to fight this, but unfortunately the president had outsmarted us. I just would like to say it reminds me of Henry Kissinger's quote that when the pursuit of peace is the sole objective of foreign policy, it becomes a weapon in the most ruthless. And that's exactly what's happened. I don't think that the Obama administration knows that evil exists. He thinks we could all just sing Kumbaya together, and that way we will tame the beast. But it just, has proven already not to work, and it's made America, Israel, and the Sunni Arab nations much, much more vulnerable. And
That's an excellent question. I had discussed briefly the issue of possible military dimensions, and the IAEA issued a report in December on this issue that found that Iran did not fully cooperate with its investigation of this issue and had actually lied to the IAEA on certain parts of it. But the IAEA did not close the file on this issue. The IAEA Board of Governors voted unanimously to do so. It took this report, which did not close the file, and the Board of Governors decided to close the file. And concerning the overall verification of the agreement, it is unclear how certain sites in Iran will be inspected, if they're inspected at all. As I said earlier, I think some of these sites could be inspected by Iranians, and I suspect military sites may not be inspected at all.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question, in regards to the $150 billion, will it be transmitted all at once, or will any money be left for the next administration to withhold?
Well, the sanctions relief is generally not a direct payment of funds. In some ways, it is the lifting of sanctions. In some ways, it means bank accounts have been opened, and I'm not sure that all of it is going to be released this month, and I suspect some of it probably has been released over the last couple months. Well, I'm very concerned that there's collaboration between the North Korean and Iranian nuclear program, but no one has proven that yet. I think it's very likely, since they have been cooperating concerning ballistic missiles, and as I said, there have been Iranian scientists seen in North Korea during nuclear tests. I don't know how the Obama administration is going to deal with the North Korean nuclear test. I'm concerned that the purpose of this test was to lure the Obama administration into trying to negotiate a deal with North Korea similar to the Iran deal. I suspect the North Koreans think that deal was a pretty good deal, and they want one also. To the Obama administration's credit, they have not gone down that road so far, and they haven't tried to do that. There have been diplomatic overtures to North Korea. There was one last fall. But it does not look like they're working on a similar agreement, but I think we have to keep an eye on this. I suspect Iran would slowly work on developing its nuclear weapons capability, and we won't be calling them a nuclear weapons power before the next president takes office. Now, I will tell you that I have colleagues who think Iran already has nuclear weapons. I don't hold that view myself, but they've made a good case that there is evidence that this program has advanced so far that they may have already constructed a few weapons. But my belief is they're going to continue the technology so they eventually, even while the nuclear deal is in effect, develop an industrial scale nuclear program that will be able to make a significant amount of enriched uranium for many bombs in just a few years. Well, a military campaign would be extremely unpopular, and I think that the United States could clearly take out Iran's nuclear program, but I think there still are options short of military action that can stop this program. But it means working with European allies, and it means putting pressure on Russia and China and other states that are cooperating with Iran. I think there was potential for doing that after the Bush administration, but when President Obama came to office, one of his goals was getting an agreement, any agreement with Iran. And I think Richard Perle is right. It was because he wants to transform Iran. So I'm not ready to say military action is the only option. I still think there are options through tough diplomacy. This is an excellent question. Congressman Mike Pompeo, who's on the House Intelligence Committee, sent a letter to the State Department asking what kind of agreement is this. Now, many of us think it is a treaty, or at least it should be considered a treaty. Presidents, unfortunately, have the prerogative to decide what are treaties. I know my friend Andy McCarthy doesn't agree with that, but that's been the precedent through history. The administration wrote back to Pompeo and said that this is an unsigned, non-binding political commitment. That means the next president can throw it out at his or her first day in office. But it was a strange response, because if this is such an historic agreement, if it is as historic and crucial to our national security as the President's Secretary Kerry said, how can it be non-binding on it? Why was it not signed? It's strange, but I mean, I think that if this was a treaty, it obviously would not just legally binding on the United States, but it would have significantly more legitimacy. Position I've said over and over again is that I think every presidential candidate has to pledge to tear up this agreement on his or her first day in office. And Cruz and Rubio and Christie and Fiorina and Huckabee have said they're going to do that. I think other candidates are willing to do that, with the exception of Bush, Kasich, and Paul. And I've written some harsh things about them. I think that if they're serious about fighting the Iran nuclear program, they have to pledge to tear this agreement up in the first day in office. I think I think Israel is on the brink right now of what it can do, because I think a lot of this program has been moved underground. Not all of my colleagues agree with that. They think that Israel could still take it out and do significant damage to roll it back. I'm real concerned that the United States has, under President Obama, seems to be more concerned about Israel attacking Iran than Iran pursuing nuclear weapons. And I think too many of our intelligence and diplomatic resources have been devoted to watching Israel, so we can prevent and have advance warning of an Israeli strike on Iran. I just think that's absolutely backwards in terms of our national security. I guess the best I can say is I just think they're on the brink. It would be a very difficult decision. I would say right now that Israel probably is not going to do that.
All right. One other aspect of this, which I find incredibly troubling, is what has happened to our moral fiber as a nation. Secretary of State Kerry said in Davos, Switzerland last Thursday, quote, I think that some of it, meaning the money from the Iranian nuclear deal, will end up in the hands of the IRGC or other entities, some of which are labeled terrorists. He goes, to some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented. But I can tell you this, right now, we are not seeing the early delivery of funds going to that kind of endeavor at that point in time. Of course, this was just a few days after implementation day, and now that Iran is hooked up to the SWIFT method of transferring funds, we might not even know. One of my questions is whether or not the Department of Assets Control in the U.S. Treasury can still prevent anything, or is still actually watching the movement of assets around the world, of Iranian assets, and whether or not any of the UN resolutions having to deal with this are still in effect today.
Well, the UN resolutions have been lifted. The only resolutions that weren't lifted concern ballistic missiles and conventional weapons transfers to Iran, sanctions on those transfers. There's still laws in the books that the United States has concerning sanctions in some of these activities. And I think that our government has a significant capability to track these transfers. The problem is I don't think that the Obama administration is going to do anything about it. I think the ballistic missile test last fall, that Iran's refusal to cooperate with the investigations past nuclear-related activities, the firing of rockets against near the U.S. air carrier, Iran's intervention into Syria, these were more than ample reasons to not lift sanctions against Iran because we don't know how they're going to use this money. Well, actually, we do know how they're going to use this money. So I think if the Treasury Department found evidence of Iran sponsoring terrorism or sending more money to Syria, I don't think anything's going to happen because this deal is a legacy deal for the president. And I think Richard Perel's right. It's about transforming Iran. The president doesn't really care if Iran complies with the deal, and he's not concerned about Iranian behavior. He thinks that this is some type of long-term bet to change the nature of the Iranian regime and improve its relations with the United States.
Hi, Fred. This is Adam Turner with EMET. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the frozen funds and sanctions relief. So my understanding was that there's two separate things. There's the sanctions relief, which could be billions, and then there's the $150 billion frozen funds, and that's from oil funds. My question is, they recently released the $400 million frozen funds, and that was from back in 1979. How much more money is there from 1979 funds that we essentially shut down after the Iranian Revolution?
I don't know, but I've heard there's more. I don't know how much there is, but that's a good question, and I think that the administration has to answer that. What other promises have we made to Iran if it agreed to this deal?
Fred, I can't thank you enough for all of your incredible work on this. I do want to say, just partially in answer to the statement that I've heard, well, Israel's got to do it, Israel's got to take it out, let Israel do it. Now that it's so clear that Iran is on a path to a nuclear bomb, we know a lot of this money is going to be funneled to Hezbollah and Hamas and all of Israel's enemies, and it makes it so much more difficult for Israel to do anything because of the capabilities. There are right now 100,000 Hezbollah missiles staring down at Israel just from its northern border, where Hezbollah has a very active presence in Lebanon. And there is a kind of blackmail there now, because if Israel does anything, they know that Hezbollah is going to strike, and Hamas, it's really just tragic that Obama has set us back, not only in terms of our own national security here at home, but that of our allies. And I just hope that the next president will have the capability to undo some of this tremendous, tremendous damage. Thank you so much.